There was a time in your life when it was somebody else's responsibility to do everything for you, whether that was keeping up with your hygiene to picking out your clothes. But I doubt these days you're asking for assistance in the fashion department. Why? Because at some point you said, I'll take it from here. Taking a shower is my responsibility. Or I prefer to pick out my own clothes and pack my own lunch. That responsibility, it's mine. So you're growing up. That's how it's supposed to work. But making the shift from their responsibility to mine doesn't only apply to, showers and homework, but it should also apply to matters of faith as well. At some point, we have somebody else's faith. Maybe you grew up with the faith of your parents or your friends' parents. Maybe you're new to church and everything you know about God or faith comes from a friend or what you see on TV. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's where every single person starts, but it's not where everyone should stay. The goal is to move from a faith that's theirs to a faith that's mine. So what exactly does it take to ignite your faith? How does it move from something you were taught as a kid to something you live as an adult? How do you make your faith your own? I'm talking about personalizing your faith in Jesus to the point that you are confident in your identity and in God's plan for your life. Maybe having that type of faith isn't as complicated as some people make it out to be. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about what your life would look like if you had big, vibrant, alive type faith. It's a list of things to do, not to earn God's love, but because of it. The list of things Jesus talked about weren't about earning a relationship with God. That is what people do who already know God. Jesus mentions things like love your enemy, give to those in need, pray, don't worry, don't judge. And picking up at the end of his message, Jesus says this: therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Notice that Jesus mentions two really big ideas here: hearing his words and putting them into practice. They go together. It isn't just enough to say, I heard every sermon Jesus preached. See, there's more to having a real, authentic faith of your own than just hearing. And as Christians, we can sometimes feel like attending church or Met Youth in your case, FCA at school, we think that's enough. If we hear the right stuff and sing along with the songs, we're good. As awesome and as important as showing up is, if you and I don't do any of the things Jesus talked about, our faith will never change. It's just not about hearing. It's about hearing and doing something with what you've heard. Think about getting ready to drive. You can go to driver's ed class, learn about driving. You can pass the written test about driving. You can listen to some of your lectures from your mom about how she's a great driver and take some helpful tips from her. You can watch helpful videos about driving on YouTube. All these things are fine, but none of these things mean you are actually good at driving. You can't say, hey, Dad, I read a textbook about driving, so now can I take the car out for a road trip this weekend? We all know that's not going to work. No, your dad would say something like, I'm glad you read that textbook, but show me. Drive me around and let me see how your driving skills have developed. Then, maybe I'll let you drive to the gas station and back. Similarly, Jesus is saying that there's more to our relationship with him than just hearing his words. In fact, lots of people who were physically present on the earth with Jesus back in that day, they heard his words, but they didn't follow him. They didn't develop a faith of their own. You see, hearing and following are two different things. One of the things I love about Jesus is that he often told stories or created illustrations like the one we just heard, so we'd have a word picture in our minds of what he meant. In this case, Jesus used an illustration of two people who built two different houses. One survived the storm and one didn't. One stood strong, and one fell apart. What was the difference? Well, it wasn't hearing Jesus' words. After all, both builders were listening. The difference maker was doing. Think of it this way. Strong faith is about doing, not just knowing. Now, I'm not saying that listening to Jesus isn't important. It is, and so is showing up at church, reading the Bible, listening to messages like these. After all, you can't do if you don't hear. But as we've said over and over, hearing isn't enough. In fact, James, the brother of Jesus, he summarizes it this way. But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. All right, listen. As someone who's followed Jesus for a while now, I can tell you that one of my greater temptations is to make it all about learning and going deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's great. But if I don't put any of my deep learning into practice, I'm just fooling myself. You see, you and I can listen to sermons, do devotionals, and show up for life group, and we should do those things. But it also needs to be about you and I doing things like honoring our parents and step-parents, forgiving our siblings, loving our neighbors, praying for our enemies, giving to people in need, serving people who can't repay us, speak up for people who can't speak up for themselves, make wise decisions. I'm not talking about us doing these things without ever stumbling or falling short. I'm not talking about crushing this list 100% of the time. In fact, this is just an example of some of the things you've probably heard over time. If you've been here for a while, you know these are things that we preach about often. But the point is that we're not supposed to become perfect Christian performers. That's not the point. The point is that we want to be people who develop an authentic faith and are committed to learning and doing what we've heard. We want to try and try again, and if we fail, we keep on going. See, that kind of exercise is the type of practice that moves faith from theirs to mine.